The rock didn't just fall, it screamed. A tearing shriek that split the ground beneath Mason's boots and sent a shockwave through the air, sharp and concussive like a slap from the planet itself. The fault line hadn't shown up on the subsurface scans. It never did, not here. Terran X4 was a geological snarl of molten bands and volatile crystalline veins, a moon that cracked like glass but roared like a lion when it shifted. Mason swore and dove sideways as the ridge gave way. A cascade of mineral shards burst from the hillside, jagged spears of obsidian-laced alloy, compressed under gravity 2 times Earth's and fused by millennia of tectonic rage. He wasn't fast enough. One shard long, glinting, shaped like a rusted bayonet, ripped through his left wrist as he hit the ground. It didn't slice, it carved. Mason didn't register the pain right away. He only saw the crimson splash against his hazard suit's reinforced cuff, the arterial rhythm of it. Panic came next, not like a flood but like a razor, quick, precise, focused. He rolled to his knees, clutching his wrist, eyes already scanning his belt for the field wrap. Training kicked in mechanical, thank God. He pulled the pressure band around the wound, cinched it until his fingers turned colder than the air, then staggered upright. No time to count the seconds, no time to curse. The telemetry showed the med station 2.4 kilometers away, a line of blue against a topographic nightmare. He started walking. By the time Mason reached the Tarasi medical outpost, the bandage had turned black from blood saturation. He couldn't feel his thumb. The cold helped, at least the numbness did, but the dizziness was a threat he couldn't wrap. The outpost dome shimmered in the haze of early dusk. Its silver curves glowed against the dark red soil, soft lines of Tarasi design meant to evoke healing and harmony. He stumbled through the outer hatch, slapping the control panel with his right hand. The interior lights adjusted instantly. Cool tones, humidified air, bio-calming stimuli, gentle chimes, and pheromone mists to reduce stress. A sanctuary for a species that viewed panic as medical malpractice. Then Mason lifted his left arm and let the soaked pressure wrap fall onto the floor. The room froze. 3 Tarasi medics were on duty, 2 senior practitioners and a younger intern in a muted teal uniform. Their large membrane-lined eyes widened in synchronized horror. One staggered back. Another made a keening sound, clicking something on a wrist console. The intern vomited, violently. Mason leaned against the nearest console, sweat slicking down his face despite the cold. "Help. Please," he muttered. The senior medic, blue-ringed fins fluttering from stress, initiated a full sterilization lockdown. Transparent blast shields dropped over equipment racks. The walls hissed with sterilant vapor. A klaxon began to sound, high-pitched and rising. Mason felt the edges of the world fray. His vision narrowed. He dropped to one knee, struggling to open his field kit with one shaking hand. "Do not move," a Tarasi shrieked. But Mason had already made the decision. He'd seen what happened to open wounds out here, what the microbes in Terranex dust could do to human tissue in under 6 hours. It wasn't fear that moved him, it was memory. A friend, a wound, the swelling, the fever, the silence of the comms after the infection reached the spine. Mason tore off the wrap. The blood came fresh, darker now. He pulled the isopropyl bottle from the kit, twisted the cap with his teeth, and poured. The pain was beyond language. It stole the air from his lungs and twisted his spine like a wire. He screamed short, raw, ripped from somewhere deep and human, and dropped the bottle as his body buckled. The Tarasi lost cohesion. The intern collapsed into a corner, sobbing. One senior began a recorded medical violation report in a shaking voice. The other demanded a psychological containment team. They didn't touch him. Mason's forehead hit the floor. He didn't care. The pain blurred into static. But somewhere in his body, deep in the marrow, something flickered, an old whisper of chemical warmth, of engineered repair. Then, nothing. He awoke in stages. First, the smell clean saline, unfamiliar antiseptics. Then the sound of a monitor, a rhythmic beeping. His left arm was bound in a gel splint, immobilized from the elbow down, suspended in a nutrient sling. Lines ran from ports in his forearm to a wall unit pulsing with alien script. An overlay showed tendon reconstruction. vessel stabilization, microfracture detection. A note in red, observation status, high risk. He groaned. A faint voice responded, translated through the station's interface. You are stabilized. Do not move. The speaker was Isan the intern, still pale, still wary, but standing closer than before. I had to override protocol, Isan said. They wouldn't touch you. They thought the alcohol was corrosive. Mason blinked. Did it look like a weapon? It looked like self-harm. It made them ill. Mason swallowed hard. I didn't have time to wait. They debated that. How long was I out? 18 hours. We repaired the tendon and controlled the blood loss. No arterial rupture. You're lucky. Mason exhaled. His fingers wouldn't move yet, but the arm was still there. That mattered. Isan stepped closer. You poured acid into an open wound, deliberately. Alcohol, not acid. Isan tilted his head. To us, the distinction is irrelevant. Days passed. Mason stayed in the medbay, his arm bound and body under constant monitoring. Recovery protocol was strict. No exertion. Nutrient cycles tailored to promote regeneration. Stim pads to prevent atrophy. But on the fourth day, something changed. The wound site showed signs of healing too advanced for the injury. Terrassi scans picked up fibrillar growth patterns, biological scaffolding forming over tissue in a lattice unseen in any documented human case. The senior medics escalated it to the sector database. Mason didn't say anything until they confronted him with molecular printouts and tone-shifted demands for clarity. Then he told them about the program, about the embedded nanofibers, the trauma-triggered healing response, the synthetic proteins that acted only under duress. It was for fieldwork, Mason said quietly. Places like this, where surgery's not a guarantee. Isan listened, stunned. The other medics recoiled as though from confession. You used pain as a trigger, one whispered. Mason nodded. It was the only way to live. Isan didn't respond. Not right away. But he stayed in the room longer that day. And the next. The Terrassi didn't sleep the way humans did. Their rest cycles ran in staggered biorhythms, brief meditative stasis followed by low-energy activity. Even in their quarters, they remained aware of their surroundings. The whole medbay seemed to float in a half-lit lull, with only the soft gurgle of air filters and biogel pumps breaking the silence. Mason, meanwhile, couldn't sleep at all. Pain wasn't screaming anymore, but it lingered like a bruise behind his bones, a constant reminder that something inside his arm had been rebuilt, that it hadn't been natural. He flexed the fingers on his left hand. Nothing moved yet, just the faintest twitch near the thumb. From the corner of the medbay, Isan watched. You're not supposed to attempt movement until week 3, the intern said quietly. Stimulators are maintaining muscle tone. I wasn't trying, it's reflex. Isan walked over, tapping something into the arm-mounted interface. His movements were careful now, less like he was handling a contagious specimen, more like he was curious despite himself. There's no sign of infection, he said after a moment, which is statistically improbable, especially given the exposure window. I know, Mason said, resting his head back against the gel pillow. That's the point of the program. Isan hesitated. You volunteered? Mason didn't answer at first. Yeah, he said finally. 3 years ago, after a cave-in on Sci-Fi station. We lost a man because no one could reach him in time. He bled out waiting for evac. The silence between them grew taut. They offered the patch trials to people working alone. I said yes. And the alcohol? It's the trigger. Trauma alone doesn't activate the scaffolds. You need a chemical shock, sterile, aggressive. It forces the agent to start weaving. Works in theory. But if your wound is too dirty, or the deployment's patchy, you end up with necrotic tissue wrapped in carbon filaments. No second chances. Isan looked at Mason as if he were hearing static. That's not healing. That's roulette. Sometimes, Mason said, that's what survival looks like. The senior medics didn't take it well. A formal review was assembled 3 days later. Not just the outpost staff, but remote contributors from Terrassi medical academies across the system. Mason sat upright in a recliner, his left arm still locked in a support exoframe, while images of his injury, treatment, and biomolecular anomalies played in holographic loops overhead. The Trasi medics circled him, tall, smooth-skinned, and visibly distressed. "This procedure," one said, eyes flashing blue, "is a weaponized risk vector. Trauma-induced biochemistry is non-consensual to the tissue system." "He's still healing," Isan said carefully, breaking the circle of consensus. The others paused, displeased. Another elder spoke. "You did not heal him. The human's body was forced to endure a state of biochemical emergency that we did not initiate or permit." "I was dying," Mason said. "That does not negate the method's volatility." Mason exhaled. He'd tried diplomacy. Now, bluntness. "You think what I did was reckless? Fine, I agree. But that's what the protocol demands. Isolation deployments don't always come with biosanctuaries and 20 trained medics. Sometimes, you're alone, bleeding into dust full of fungal spores and metal splinters. You either do something drastic or you don't make it back." The panel went silent. Even the biogel pumps seemed to hold still. Isan looked at him, a furrow in his normally smooth brow. "You calculated the trauma?" he asked. "You anticipated it?" "No," Mason admitted, "but I prepared for the worst. That's different." Week 4 arrived with fresh challenges. The immobilization frame came off, replaced by a compact flex brace. Isan personally managed the removal, watching closely for tissue irregularities. There were none, at least, none their scans could detect. But that didn't mean it didn't hurt. The first time Mason tried to bend his wrist, a spike of pain shot up his forearm like a javelin. He hissed, leaned back, eyes watering. Isan frowned. "You didn't tear anything, but the tendon's stiff. Regrowth has integrated, but the fibers aren't neural synced yet." "I noticed." Isan hesitated. "We can delay the therapy, another week or 2. "No, if I wait, the scar tissue locks." Isan looked down. "Scar tissue is expected. You've already exceeded your kind's cellular regeneration benchmarks." Mason turned his wrist a few millimeters, then stopped. "That doesn't mean it's painless." Isan blinked. "I assumed your pain threshold was elevated." "Not elevated," Mason said, "just managed." He didn't elaborate. Isan didn't push. 2 days later, Isan brought something unexpected to the therapy session. It wasn't a treatment module or recovery program. It was a scroll, woven from some kind of fibrous gel cloth, glowing faintly, etched with fine, looping script. "What's this?" Mason asked. "Terasi healing rites," Isan said. "Symbolic. Not medical. It's poetry, I guess. In our old language. It describes how pain is a signal to the soul, a message that something must return to balance." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You brought me poetry?" Isan's throat frill flushed a faint lavender. "I thought it might help." Mason smiled, the first genuine one in days. "You're not as terrified of me anymore. I still think you're reckless. But?" Isan glanced at the brace on Mason's arm. "But I'm starting to understand that you didn't panic because of the pain. You acted because of the risk. That's the job." "No," Isan said, "that's your species." By week 6, Mason's grip returned barely. He could close his hand into a partial fist, still couldn't lift weight or rotate the wrist fully, but the scaffolding was working, slowly. The Trasi continued their ethics review. Mason was now referenced in 3 academic forums and 2 interspecies policy working groups. One medical journal on Trisec 8 called his actions symptomatic of anthropoid aberration culture. Mason wasn't offended. Isan, however, was livid. "They used your case to justify restricting field autonomy. Terasi medics are now prohibited from honoring human field actions during critical intervention windows." Mason grunted. "Expected. It's wrong. It's protective." Isan stared at him. "You're defending them?" "I'm healing. I don't have the luxury of being indignant." Isan looked away. His fingers tapped an anxious rhythm on the edge of the console. "They're afraid of you," he said softly. "Of what it means. That pain can be useful. That trauma can be a tool. It doesn't match our framework." Mason didn't answer immediately. He flexed his fingers, winced, then tried again. You ever seen a field medic work during a meteor storm? He asked. One hand cauterizing a wound, the other holding the patient down. Painkillers run out, pressure cuffs fail. You don't talk about comfort. You talk about minutes left. Isan watched him, something unreadable in his eyes. That's what survival means for us. Not harmony, not perfect repair, just not dying, until you can get help. Isan said nothing. But later, Mason found the scroll beside his cot, open to a new passage. It read, roughly translated, "When the storm arrives, the reed bends, not because it chooses weakness, but because it survives the wind." By week 7, the pain had shifted. It no longer stabbed, it pulsed. A dull, dragging weight that tugged at Mason's every movement, a reminder that no healing, no matter how advanced, happened without cost. The brace was gone now, replaced by a flexible support mesh embedded with passive neuromuscular sensors. The Tarasi called it kinetic whispering. It helped retrain damaged pathways through subtle tactile feedback. It also itched like hell. Mason sat in the therapy dome, rotating his wrist against soft resistance bands while an interface projected his progress. A green spiral lit up every time he hit a recovery target. Today, only half the spiral was active. Isan watched quietly, stylus in hand. Flexion has returned to 68%, the intern said, frowning slightly. Supination is still below threshold. Mason sighed. Feels like I'm trying to twist a wrench made of cold rubber. You shouldn't be using wrenches yet. It's a metaphor. Isan made a note and glanced at the monitor again. Your grip strength's improving. You're ahead of our projected curve. Only because I cheated. Isan stiffened. Is that how you see it? No, Mason said, then corrected himself. Maybe, some days. Depends on how it aches. He reached for the water pack with his left hand. It trembled slightly but held, his fingers wrapped around the pack without assistance. Isan blinked. That's the first time you've done that without stabilization. Mason nodded. Feels like something finally clicked. Are the fibers still active? No idea. They don't come with a user manual. Isan hesitated. Would you do it again? The alcohol? Mason didn't answer right away. He took a sip, then set the pack down. If the same thing happened again, in the same place? Yeah, every time. Isan looked away, throat crest fluttering. The council decided, they're issuing a directive. All incoming human kits will be scanned. Trauma-activated systems will be flagged and removed. Mason stared at him. They're banning it? Yes. Officially, the protocol violates the Tarasi Healing Compact. Unregulated pain triggers are now classified as high-risk psychosurgical instruments. Mason laughed once, bitterly. That's a mouthful. There was debate, Isan added. I argued. Others did too. I know, Mason said. But it's not personal. It's about your culture. You don't see pain the way we do. Isan looked at him, serious now. Maybe we should. It was near the start of week 8 when the quake hit. A minor one by Terranex standards. No landslide this time, no mineral shrapnel, just a deep, resonant shudder that rolled through the bedrock like a groaning whale. The outpost lights dimmed for a moment. Warning glyphs flashed, then faded. But in the auxiliary lab, something cracked. Mason and Isan were cataloging BioScan's routine neural assessments to compare Mason's tendon reinnervation to baseline human data. The tremor knocked a ceiling-mounted tray loose, scattering surgical microblades across the floor. One struck Isan's upper shoulder, a glancing hit, not deep, but blood welled instantly, a translucent teal, thick and almost gelatinous. It pulsed once, then began to congeal on contact with air. Isan hissed, pressing a hand to the wound. Mason moved without thinking. He grabbed the sterilizer wand from the table, activated the micro-heat setting, and scanned it over Isan's shoulder, carefully avoiding direct contact. Then he reached for a dressing pad and applied gentle pressure. You need a med patch, Mason said, and probably antibiotics. Isan flinched as Mason secured the wrap. I can manage. It's minor. You're bleeding. It's within tolerable loss. Still bleeding, Mason repeated. That's how infections start. Isan looked up, a strange glint in his eye. Now, you sound like us. Mason smirked. Blame proximity. That night, while Isan rested in the regen bay, Mason sat at the auxiliary terminal, hand on the pulse sensor, eyes watching the slow arc of progress. His own wound had sealed now skin-tight, scar a faint ridge beneath the outer dermal layer. Full function was approaching. He could open and close his hand now without tremor, rotate the wrist, grip a diagnostics rod, and even operate delicate touch interfaces. But the pain hadn't vanished. It lingered not as an enemy, but as a companion, a whisper of what had been risked and what had been reclaimed. The door behind him opened. Isan walked in, his shoulder patched with a dermal sealer. He moved slowly but upright. "You shouldn't be up," Mason said. Isan ignored the comment and sat beside him. "I wanted to understand," the intern said after a moment, "how your body tolerated such a radical response. We thought your tissue would destabilize, that the proteins would attack your own cells." "They might have," Mason said. "It was a roll of the dice." "Why risk it?" Mason looked at him. "Because I've seen what happens when you don't." Isan was quiet for a long time. Then, in a rare shift of posture, he leaned back, something Tarasi usually avoided in professional settings. "When I was in training," he said, "we studied ancient battlefield records, primitive medicine, the idea of treating a wound under fire. It seemed unthinkable, crude, painful. I thought no species could function like that. But we did." Isan nodded slowly. "You adapted. You created protocols that assumed you would suffer and trained yourselves to operate anyway." Mason shrugged. "When the alternative is death, you learn fast." Isan's voice dropped to a near whisper. "And yet, you still feel. All the time." The alien didn't respond, but there was something in his expression Mason hadn't seen before. Not fear, not revulsion. Respect. Week 10 brought the storm. A thermal surge rising from Taranex's equator triggered planet-wide seismic resonance. Evacuation orders were issued to all surface teams. Shuttles began descending, but the outpost's launch pads suffered a structural failure. Their lift was delayed. Repair estimates: 36 hours minimum. Which meant, if the storm front reached the outpost before launch, they'd be buried under crystalline ash and plasma-charged winds. And the only viable communication relay had a busted power array 500 meters uphill. Mason suited up without waiting for permission. "You're not fully cleared for load-bearing," Isan protested. "I'm cleared enough. I can walk, I can carry, and I don't need both hands to reroute a junction loop." Isan glanced at his own arm. "Then I'm coming too." "No, you're still healing." "We both are," Isan said, voice firm. "Let's not pretend otherwise." They reached the relay node just as the wind began howling through the canyon. The temperature dropped by 30 degrees in minutes. Mason's wrist ached, but he ignored it, his fingers moving through the panel with learned precision. Isan stabilized the power cell while Mason rewired the uplink. They worked fast, wordlessly, until the signal blinked green. "Comm relays live," Mason said. "Evac confirmation in 36 hours." Isan looked up at the sky. "Just in time." Mason flexed his hand. "Told you I could still fix things." "You still ache," Isan said softly. "Yeah. Do you regret it?" Mason watched the clouds roll in, fire bright and heavy. "No," he said. "Some scars are worth it." But the pain hadn't vanished. It lingered not as an enemy, but as a companion, a whisper of what had been risked and what had been reclaimed. The door behind him opened. Isan walked in, his shoulder patched with a dermal sealer. He moved slowly but upright. "You shouldn't be up," Mason said. Isan ignored the comment and sat beside him. "I wanted to understand," the intern said after a moment, "how your body tolerated such a radical response. We thought your tissue would destabilize, that the proteins would attack your own cells." By the time the evacuation shuttle touched down, the storm was already clawing at the ridgeline. Taranex 4's atmosphere wasn't known for subtlety. Lightning burst sideways across the ash-laced sky, static discharges dancing across mineral formations like sparks on dry bone. The wind screamed across the surface in great exhalations of superheated dust, and every step toward the shuttle bay felt like walking into the exhale of a dying god. Mason limped through it, hand clenched protectively to his chest, not because it was failing him anymore, but because it wasn't yet whole. The brace was off, the muscles had recovered most of their mass, and his grip could finally pass an equipment load test. But he knew what still lingered. Stiffness in the morning, phantom aches when the pressure dropped, the occasional sharp sting when he over-rotated. He'd regained full function. But full comfort? That was a different story. Isan walked beside him, the sling removed from his shoulder 3 days prior. His wound had closed entirely, and while the pigmentation around it was darker than before, it would fade with time. His posture had changed. Taller somehow. More grounded. When the shuttle doors sealed behind them, and the thrusters began their climb, Isan turned to him. "I read the final directive," he said, almost over the engine roar. "It's been circulated to all Tarasi medical outposts in the sector." Mason nodded. "I figured. No trauma-activated field agents. All human kits will be scanned and flagged on arrival. Emergency overrides require interspecies consent forms, signed in advance." Mason cracked a tired smile. "Sounds about right." Isan hesitated. They included a clause, specifically forbidding humans from self-administering chemical triggers in Tarasi space. "Just say it," Mason said. "The clause has my name on it, doesn't it?" "Yes," the Mason addendum. He laughed once, dry and short. "Could have gone with something more dramatic. The wrist gambit, maybe?" Isan didn't smile. "You could appeal it," the intern said. "The ethics committee agreed your recovery was effective. Some even called it remarkable. Let them call it what they want. I didn't do it for applause." "Then why did you refuse to let us take over? The moment you walked into the medbay, why not let the staff handle it?" Mason leaned back against the padded seat. "Because I didn't believe you'd act fast enough. I'd already lost time. I couldn't afford the gap between observation and intervention." Isan absorbed that in silence. Then, finally, "I might have done the same." That surprised him. Mason looked over, expecting hesitation, maybe doubt. But Isan's face was calm. "You're not designed to do that," Mason said. "Culturally, I mean. We weren't, but maybe we're learning." The return to Central Base on orbiting Terran X1 was quiet. The other human surveyors greeted Mason with the kind of casual, hard-earned nods that said more than a speech ever could. The outpost doctor, a woman named Kara, insisted on running another scan herself before she'd sign off on his return to duty. "You know they're still talking about you down there?" she said while calibrating the scanner. "You're in 3 medical bulletins, 2 xenoethics reports, and a lecture slide titled Human Adaptation, Rational or Insanity." Mason groaned. "I'm not even getting royalties." "Your repair profile looks stable," she said, reading the output. "Tendons fully integrated. Scar tissue is present, but minimal. You'll have some residual stiffness when it's cold." "Yeah, I noticed." She tapped the side of the console. "Wouldn't recommend another trauma trigger anytime soon. Your system's been stressed hard. The scaffold fibers are mostly metabolized now, but there's still residue. Another shock might overload the regrowth interface." "I wasn't planning on making it a hobby." Kara paused, then looked him dead in the eye. "You scared them," she said, "but you also impressed them. That's a rare mix." He nodded slowly. "I know." 2 weeks later, the formal debrief was scheduled. A panel of human and Tarasi officials, half clinical, half political, wanted a final statement from Mason. Not an apology, not an endorsement, just a closing word. A capstone to the event that had rippled through half a sector's worth of medical circles. Mason showed up in uniform, left hand wrapped lightly in a compression glove, not for healing anymore, but to manage strain when typing. The room was half lit, the panel seated behind translucent bioglass. A moderator addressed him through the intercom. "We acknowledge the recovery was successful," the voice said. "We do not dispute the outcome, but we must ask, given the opportunity to act differently, would you still choose the same course?" Mason didn't hesitate. "Yes." Murmurs spread. The translator flicked green to indicate comprehension. The moderator seemed caught off guard. "You would deliberately induce trauma?" "No," Mason clarified. "I wouldn't seek it out. But if the only alternative was death by inaction, then yes, I'd do it again." Another pause. Then, "Do you believe the Tarasi response was inadequate?" No, I believe they responded according to their framework. It just didn't match the urgency of the situation. That's not incompetence, it's divergence. More murmurs. Then a different voice, calmer, older. Do you consider pain a tool? Mason smiled, but not mockingly. I consider it a signal. Like any signal, sometimes it's a warning, and sometimes it's the only thing keeping you conscious long enough to survive. There was no more debate. When Mason left the chamber, Isan was waiting. The intern, no longer in teal, now wore a silver-trimmed sash, indicating senior residency status. A recent promotion, no doubt expedited by weeks of practical crisis experience. I reviewed your statement, Isan said. Yeah? I submitted a parallel report to the Tarasi Council. I suggested we integrate human case studies into our trauma curriculum. Mason raised an eyebrow. They agree? Eventually. It will take time. Our systems don't change easily. No systems do. Isan paused, then held something out. A scroll. Different from the last one. This one was sealed with a node of cooled resin, etched with the Tarasi symbol for transition. What is it? Mason asked. A rite. One we usually perform at the end of a healing cycle. It marks not the closure of the wound, but the integration of its lesson. Mason took the scroll and held it gently in his palm. His fingers curled around it without hesitation. I'll read it. I know. They stood there for a moment longer. Then Isan nodded once and walked away. Mason sat alone later that evening, watching the stars shift behind the observation window. The scar on his wrist glinted faintly under the room's low light. He flexed his fingers again. Smooth, strong, but not the same. And that was okay. He unfolded the scroll. Read the lines slowly. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the messenger. What we do with the message becomes the legacy. He leaned back, smiling just slightly. The price had been steep, the fallout political, the misunderstanding vast. But the hand worked. And when the council's final directive came across his comm, he read it in full. Directive 74392. Human self triage in Tarasi medical facilities. Under no circumstances are humans to self-administer trauma-activated treatments within Tarasi care environments. All field kits will be screened and modified upon arrival. Violations will result in containment and reassessment. This directive shall remain in place pending further interspecies research. Mason nodded. Fair, he whispered, and shut the message off.